Nigel Farage, unser Abschlussredner, gilt als Schlüsselfigur, als eigentliche Schlüsselfigur in der ganzen BREXIT-Debatte, eigentlich auch schon im Wahlkampf davor. Er hat mit seiner UKIP, mit der Partei, mit der UK Independence Party, bei der er ja auch lange Parteichef war, vehement Wahlkampf betrieben für einen Austritt von Großbritannien aus der EU. Großbritannien sei better out of, also besser dran ohne die EU, und ich denke, das sieht er heute mehr denn je so. Willkommen hier am Zurich Economic Impulse, Nigel Farage, bitte sehr.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everybody. At 12:29 British summertime, on the 29th of March 2017, the British ambassador to the European Union arrived at the Council of Europe's offices and met the former Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk. And he gave him a letter. And that letter was triggering Article 50. And now we have passed the point of no return. There is no doubt about one thing: Britain is leaving the European Union. Now, there are some of you who may think that's a good thing. There are some of you who may think that's a bad thing. I've campaigned for this for 25 years. So for me, yesterday was the day that the impossible dream came true. I first formed my views about the European project when, unlike virtually everybody else in politics within the European Union, when I had a proper job. That's right, I worked in business. I didn't go straight from Oxford University into the House of Commons. I worked in the commodities business. I worked in a business where we were pretty much tariff-free in terms of buying and selling and trading and shipping copper, aluminium, lead, zinc, tin, and nickel all over the world. And it was there, working in that business, that I began to see in the 1980s and through the 90s that the world was changing. That Europe, an important marketplace though it may be, was, with every single year that went by, actually becoming a little bit less important as other new emerging economies were coming through. And I began to ask myself a question. Why would we, as the United Kingdom, inextricably tie and link ourselves with our next door neighbours and yet be forbidden from making our own trade relationships with any other part of the world because we're stuck as part of a totally outdated customs union? So by about 1990, I'd pretty much made up my mind that we should not be members of this club, and not being a shy person by natural inclination, I wasn't afraid to tell people what I thought. And I think most people, whether it's friends or family or business colleagues, thought perhaps I'd been smoking something a bit funny that had perhaps turned my mind. But now I started standing for election in the 1990s. I managed at the end of the 90s to get myself into the European Parliament. And you know, going into that environment after 20 years in business, I think gave me a tremendous advantage. I began to realize that the people that were making the laws, namely the European Commission, the unelected European Commission, hardly any of them had ever had any commercial experience in their lives. And the same went, it has to be said, for the European Parliament as well. So I've battled and I've campaigned, and I think the European project, and by the way, well done Switzerland and Norway for keeping out, very sensible, two richest countries in the European time zone, neither members of that corrupt union. But well, don't laugh. They haven't had the accounts signed off by the auditor now for 20 years in a row. I think I'm quite justified in calling it a corrupt club. Anyway, I also saw two huge hubristic mistakes that the European project made. The first was expansion. Mr. Barroso, who was Commission President for 10 years, said we are building an empire. He was completely unashamed about that comment. And of course, all empires seek and wish to expand before, of course, as history shows, they are, by one means or another, destroyed. And I think to let in first 8 and then 10 former communist countries, when in some cases they had not made the transition to being full Western democracies, was a dramatic mistake. You know, take Bulgaria. You know, very often small Balkan and Eastern countries, you know, their governments have a mafia to deal with. In Bulgaria, the mafia has a government to deal with. Anybody Bulgarian, you can sue me, I'm not really very worried. But these countries had not become full Western democracies. And to say to people whose average incomes were about a tenth of what the incomes were in Germany or the United Kingdom, inevitably led to huge, huge flows of people moving to Northern European countries, which led to lower wages, which led to resentment. And the second catastrophic mistake that the project made was to extend the Eurozone to include the Mediterranean. Now, those of us that had just half an idea of economics said that Germany and the Low Countries, and perhaps France on a good day, could survive together within, you know, what would constitute an optimal currency zone. But it was never, ever going to be possible for those countries, such as Greece, or ultimately even Italy, or Spain, or Portugal, or Cyprus, it was never going to be possible for them to exist together inside the same economic and monetary union. It isn't just that they've got different levels of wages, they've got different levels of productivity, they've even got completely different cultural attitudes to what we might define in the north as hard work. The Mediterranean take a slightly different view of what hard work is. It doesn't mean that we in the Protestant north are better than they are or worse than they are, but it does mean that we're very different from each other, and the attempt to force them all into one has actually been a tragedy. And just think about this as a measure of failure. You know, when the Americans went through the Great Depression, buddy, can you spare us a dime? The American economy had contracted from the Wall Street crash to the early middle 30s by 16%. The Greek economy has now contracted by 28% since 2008. And whilst there was a moderate uptick last year, there is frankly no prospect of improvement. And I think in the face of all of this, and given that many leading politicians in the United Kingdom, Tony Blair, the Prime Minister for many years, Lord Heseltine, the Deputy Prime Minister for many years, Nick Clegg, of course, until quite recently, the Deputy Prime Minister, many senior figures in big politics, many senior figures in the big banks, many senior figures in big business, told us in 2000 that we too should join this exciting adventure, give up the pound and join the euro. Well, thank goodness we did not. We'd have found ourselves actually, given our levels of expenditure, I mean, goodness knows what the Troika would have done to us. We didn't do it. And I think that's why Brexit happened, folks. It happened because collectively, it wasn't just people like me saying they've got it all wrong. Collectively, huge numbers of people could see that actually this project, that everybody that was big, as I say, big companies, big banks, big politics, that frankly everything they'd said and everything they'd predicted was frankly wrong. So we saw the referendum in Britain last year. We saw the usual suspects lined up on the Remain side. We saw terrible threats being given to the British people, that if we voted leave, our house prices would collapse, that millions of people would lose their jobs. I mean, they almost, not quite, but they almost told us that a plague of biblical locusts would descend on the land and eat everything green. I mean, they couldn't have been, more apocalyptic in their vision. And yet against that, a coalition of people, entrepreneurs who'd made their own way in the world, small and medium-sized enterprises, and just ordinary people, regardless whether they came from the left of politics, by being Labour supporters, the right of politics, by being Conservative supporters, or at the heart of British public opinion by being UKIP supporters. And some of you might get that. And it didn't matter, and we won. We won, and I think Brexit, I think we'll look back in 100 years, 200 years, and we will look at 2016 as one of those standout years, a year in which actually everything did genuinely change. Because from Brexit, we moved on to an event that looked to be even more incredible across the other side of the Atlantic. Many people thought that Trump was just a loudmouthed, brash New Yorker who shot his mouth off without thinking. All of that's reasonably true, I suppose, in one way. But what they missed was that whilst Trump may sound a bit outrageous, may look a bit outrageous, actually Trump's instincts for politics and business are sound and good. And what Trump was doing, he was actually reaching in to the conscience of Middle America, who felt they'd been ignored by Washington, just as we felt we were utterly detached from Brussels. And I have to say, I've done many things in my political career. I led UKIP into winning the 2014 European elections in the UK. It was the first time since 1906 that a party that wasn't Labour or Conservative had won a national election. I'd forced the Prime Minister to concede a referendum that he never thought he'd have to give. And I'm convinced that he and his wife Samantha, before they go to bed every night, stick pins in an effigy of me because he wishes he'd never actually made that promise. So I'd done some big things. I'd been on quite a big stage. I'd been demonized, of course, demonized for daring to take on the establishment. I mean, if you even question immigration, you're written off as being racist. There is no term of abuse that has not been thrown at me over the years. And yet, I confess that when I was there in Mississippi and the Trump rally was about to begin, and nobody had told me that I was expected to speak. And it was about 10 minutes before Trump was due to begin. There were 18,000 people in this basketball stadium, and there was rock music playing, and it was very loud and very noisy. And Trump comes over to me and says, "When I get to this bit of my speech, Nigel, I'm going to introduce you." I said, "What?" He said, "No, when I get to this bit of my speech, I'm going to introduce you. You get up there and do what you do best." I said, "What? You mean you're the warm-up act?" And I've never felt as nervous in my life as going on a stage with Trump. And I felt I'd spent 25 years trying to gain, well, really working very hard to gain any credibility in British politics. 25 years of being abused, and suddenly we had a Prime Minister who was uttering the very words, phrases, and sentences that I've been saying for 20 years. And I took 25 years of achievement, and by backing Trump, I effectively played double or quits with the whole of that 25 years. But he won. And for those that are discombobulated, worried, upset, and particularly those of you in business, because I understand the job of people in business is to get on with their businesses, make money, and they don't want politics to interfere or upset them or get in the way. But I want to say, firstly, to those of you that are worried, nervous about what these political changes may mean for you, and whether these things could roll in to 2017 and beyond, I would say to those that are upset by 2016, well, I'm very sorry, but you ain't seen nothing yet. Because there is a fundamental attitudinal I enjoyed that. There is a fundamental attitudinal change that is now taking place across the West. There is a new kind of politics that has now come into being. It is a politics of identity. It is a politics of nationality. It is a politics of culture. And it is a politics that no longer has any respect at all for the career, professional, political classes. And that doesn't mean that I'm absolutely telling you that Marine Le Pen will win on May the 7th, but I tell you what, she'll be in the last two on May the 7th. And even if she doesn't win, she will win, because what she'll do is shift the centre of gravity of this debate. Brexit is not, as Mr. Juncker would have you believe, Brexit is not just a one-off, isolated incident. This European Union, as we know it, is going to disappear. And personally, I have to say that the one thing I did disagree with yesterday was when Theresa May, when the letter was delivered, the first paragraph was that we in the United Kingdom wish the European Union well. That's quite bizarre, isn't it, really? Because we've now got a British Prime Minister who says that because we've left, we can become a proper democracy. Because we've left, we can trade with the world. Because we've left, we can do wonderful things and be adaptable and flexible as a nation. So why, if it's good for us, wouldn't we want that for our friends and neighbours? So make no mistake, I'm a proper revolutionary. I'm not satisfied just with Brexit. I want to get the whole of Europe out of the European Union, and I want us to have a Europe of independent, sovereign nation states that trade together freely, that cooperate with each other, that are open to sensible, common, minimum standards and full cross-border cooperation. But the idea of supranationalism, the idea of individual nations giving away the ability to chart their own futures is dying before your very eyes. Is this bad for business? Well, I have to say this to you. Whatever you've read or whatever interpretation you've got of Brexit, Brexit most certainly is not bad for business. Not bad for UK business, because why would you want to be part of a European single market where your biggest industries are regulated somewhere else, over which you have no more than an 8% say, and where we found ourselves in the Council of Ministers on business issues outvoted 44 times out of 44 in the last 10 years when the British government stood up and said, this regulation, this directive does not work for us. Brexit was not about pulling up the drawbridge. Brexit was not about us becoming a little Anglo-Saxon island again. Brexit actually, if you listen to the arguments that were put, Brexit was about us getting back the ability to re-engage properly as a global trading nation. Brexit was about 5.2 million small and medium-sized businesses voting for a politics where actually we could debate in general elections what employment laws we could change, what environmental laws we could change. Brexit, and the other great myth that Brexit would be a disaster for the City of London. Everyone's going to leave London and live in that gorgeous place called Frankfurt. I don't think so. I really don't think so. And why? Because London is good at what it does. But London actually, I would argue, has been damaged by the European Union single market. We saw the AIFM directive driving people to Zurich and Geneva and Singapore. We've seen successive insurance directives driving much business off to Bermuda. So Brexit is about us deregulating, becoming more competitive, and becoming a global trader. I would suspect that the one area where business may be concerned about the events of last year is the protectionism that perhaps Trump espouses at times, although it's not just Trump, is it? Because actually it's Paul Ryan, above all, who is pushing for quite big border tariffs. So Trump may not be good for international business, but Trump is going to be phenomenal for American business. He gets free enterprise, he gets capitalism, and you know what? I'm hoping that Brexit brings us real capitalism in the United Kingdom. I've had enough of living not in capitalism, but in global corporatism, where the big are able to set the rules for their own industry to the detriment of their small and medium-sized competitors. I am against homogenization, harmonization, even pasteurization of companies' rules and laws. I think people should, state to state, be able to have different tax rates. be able to have different levels of regulation. I believe in free market economics. I believe in competition. So I would put it to you that whatever negatives you've read in terms of the economy, in terms of business, whatever you've read about those things with Brexit and that revolution that will continue to roll, certainly, as far as the British are concerned, it'll be good for trade and good for business. Across Europe, as it breaks down, I can't promise the same thing. I suspect that as and when the French get independence, as and when the Italians crash out of the euro, which they're going to do, I worry that in those cases, actually, we'll get governments that move a long way to the left. And I think much of Europe and much of the Eurozone, frankly, I think I'm very pessimistic about its future, whether they stay part of the euro, whether they stay part of the European Union or not. But as far as Britain and America are concerned, you've nothing to worry your heads about. To quote the Donald, it's going to be great. Thank you.